Great.
So we're going to have a bit of a conversation. Do you want to just kind of stand a little bit further forward? Because otherwise I'm going to have to keep turning round away from the microphone.
Or you can step further back.
Well, I could do.
There we go.
And that'll still work, will it?
Yeah, that'll still work.
We're still good on the microphone.
I think so.
Okay.
Let's try it.
So, Andy, an incredible book. So your first degree was in creative writing, is that right?
Yeah, so English literature, creative writing. I was actually started university, 21 years ago.
Okay, so obviously, which is extraordinary because you're obviously still a teenager looking at you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm not 40.
So was this actually the first piece of kind of writing of any sort of this kind of scale that you've done?
Yeah, certainly on this sort of scale. I've written bits and pieces, short stories, poetry, monologues, and all that sort of stuff, but never embarked upon something like this before.
Okay.
So this is my first attempt at doing something that enormous.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, it romps along. Am I right in thinking that actually very few other people here in the room have had a chance to read it yet?
Yeah, very few. One or two people have read it, which is great. Yes, at the back.
As part of the creative process.
But not many people have. So you hopefully you'll.
So there's a real narrative. There's an extraordinary story, and actually, one would hope there's going to be a film here at some point.
Yeah,
definitely. So maybe during the interval, we could have some kind of like straw poll on who should play the lead characters. I think that'd
be good. That would be good. People say it should be made a movie.
Okay, I think it would because the interest behind the characters is fascinating.
Yes.
But it was kind of quite. I mean, in a way, it was hard for me to work out exactly at what point you began to really grasp just how interesting these grandparents of yours had been. When did the story really kind of begin to? For me,
it began at my grandfather's funeral. So he died when I was 18, just before Christmas 1999, and he was. He for me, he had been quite a distant figure for one reason or another. He was quite old, much older than my grandmother. He was harder to relate to than my grandmother, who I related to incredibly well, and we had a very close relationship always with me and my nanny, as I called her, and Grandpa was a bit more. I knew bits and pieces about him. I knew obviously that he'd been to Dresden. I knew some things, and then at his funeral, his brother delivered this extraordinary eulogy, which described a man who came to Cambridge as 1 year younger than everyone else because he'd got a scholarship, which he was from working class background, and he found himself at King's College, Cambridge in the 30s, which was a upper class environment with Etonians. So he was a fish out of water. And yet he won more prizes than I think even E.M. Forster, who was a couple of years before him. He aced everything. He was brilliant academically. He managed to kind of find his way through the social world as well. He was a contemporary of Alan Turing, who you will have heard of, and they were friends actually. And Alan Turing described my grandfather, and was quoted in the eulogy, which kind of blew me away, as the most learned man I ever met.
So if you're sitting there in the funeral and you're listening to all of this sort of stuff, and Barbara, this is your father, isn't it? Am I right? And so you, I guess, knew all of this, or was it a surprise to you as well? I'm sorry, it was a surprise to you as well. So all of this sort of extraordinary thing going on in the family, and you're sitting there,
I was
and
blown
you were
away.
18 at the time.
Yeah, I was 18 at the time.
So you began to pick up this story. Which we'll come back to later, but then you didn't really kind of press into it again for quite a few years.
Funny enough, although the first night me and my wife Liz met, I did tell her quite a lot about my grandfather, didn't I?
Yeah, I saw that in the book. I thought, but obviously you must have been very charming in other respects. Okay, yeah. Well, I did wonder about that a little bit. Anyway,
yeah.
Actually, they look quite like. Do they look quite like?
There is some family resemblance. Yeah.
Anyway.
So yes. But I left it there because I thought, well, this is interesting. I didn't think that I'd be the one to kind of tell this story. Although I think quite a lot of us felt when he died, there was unfinished business with him and his story, and he wrote a lot of stuff. that was just left in notebooks and stuff.
So what was the thing that kind of brought it back to the surface again for you?
Coming to Coventry, I discovered that Coventry and Dresden had this relationship, and I remember going to a clergy study day, and the Archbishop, David Porter, who worked for the Archbishop at the time and was part of the reconciliation team, he said, a group of us are going to Dresden to mark the 70th anniversary of the bombing of the city, and this was announced, and I was like, I need to go. I just had this innate sense of, here am I, a Coventry clergy person, with a stake in the story, a personal stake in the story of this city, Dresden, which is my grandmother's hometown. In fact, generations before her were rooted in Dresden. So it was very much this sense of, actually, I need to be there. So I managed to get myself on the trip. And this is where we got to know each other, which was wonderful. It was a wonderful time.
So you turn up in Dresden with this kind of extraordinary... I mean, I was part of that as well, of course. Also finding it slightly strange to be travelling with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who actually some people in Coventry know quite well, because he was just like a curate and a vicar here. But now he's like the Archbishop of Canterbury, for goodness sake. And we're sort of pottering around the city with him.
It was very weird.
It was quite surreal. And I remember you being actually quite overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, so... A week beforehand, I blogged about my story, and it then kind of was put on the diocesan webpage, and then I got a message from Graham Pringle, who works for the diocesan communications department, saying, the Church Times want to hear from you. So then the story was in the Church Times, and then he said, radio, then Deutsche Welle, this national German television channel, want to speak to you. So I was interviewed in the cathedral by Deutsche Welle. And then once I got to Dresden, it carried on. So they said, Deutsche Welle want to interview live outside the Frauenkirche. I was like, okay, this is strange. And Radio 5 Live want to be in touch. So I found myself, it was a very weird time. So I found myself on the actual anniversary itself, after I shared my story in German, which was a bit of a stretch, to the gathering at the Frauenkirche. Bishop Christopher was in, the 5th row. The Archbishop of Canterbury was in the 4th row. It was just, and 400 other people also were there. And I got back to the hotel room, and I was on the phone to the Stephen Nolan show. Just about an hour beforehand, the Archbishop had been shown a headline that was going to be in the Daily Mail the next day. He'd said in his speech, I have a real sense of profound sense of regret and sorrow for this bombing of Dresden. The Daily Mail headline that next morning was, Archbishop says sorry for bombing Nazis. I'll leave you to judge that yourself, but that's what the Daily Mail said. So with 4 minutes notice, the question I was by Stephen Nolan, who isn't kind of backwards and coming forwards, if you ever listen to him, was, should we say sorry for the bombing of Dresden? And I was given 4 minutes notice to think up an answer.
What did you say?
I said, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, good answer. Good answer. So let's just come back to the kind of impact on you of being in this place, which obviously is your roots, in at least some of them.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you to walk into Dresden and to walk on those streets?
It was beautiful in some ways, because I had been once before with my grandmother.
Okay.
25 years beforehand, and it was lovely, but it didn't really mean much to me when I was 19. So in some ways, you kind of wish could tell your younger self to take more notice of this. But it was lovely to kind of walk the streets of Dresden. It was very moving to go to Langerbrook, which is her home village, and go to the church and see the graveyard and see their old house as a family. But then I had this experience. In Dresden, they had this art installation called the Panometer, which is this big gas...
It's a former gasworks. Gasometer.
Yeah, that they've kind of created this panorama of the city. And most of the time it's Dresden during the Baroque era, and you can imagine it's got this lovely landscape of Dresden. But around the February time, it's changed to Dresden like the day after the bombing. So Dresden, desolate Dresden. And I just found myself walking and imagining my grandmother walking through the ruins of the city as she did weeks after the bombing, and thinking, wow, that was what she experienced that.
So a hugely powerful experience.
Yeah, it's a visceral experience.
So that kind of crystallized your sense of connection with the story. You then, I'm going to leap ahead a little bit.
Yes.
So you came back. We have this wonderful opportunity of a 3-month break, sabbatical, working, obviously important study leave in the Diocese of Coventry. My lay colleagues at the cathedral feel quite strongly about this. So you had the opportunity to actually begin to properly research this story and set it down.
Yeah.
And that led us to the book that we've got today. Now, the book, when you get to read it, you'll discover that there's a kind of an immediacy to it, and there's lots of dialogue, and kind of, Fred was thinking this, and Rika was thinking that. Did you make it up?
Some bits. So one thing I had as my source material was this, which is quite a rare copy. It's called The Cloven Pine. It is the novel my grandfather wrote in 1942. Which was to share his experience of having been in Dresden in 1936, which was how he kind of met the family. And he wrote a semi-autobiographical novel, which was published, and then the publisher was bombed to shreds, and there aren't many copies left because of that. But so because it was semi-autobiographical, and because I kind of felt like I know him enough, actually I could work out which bits of the dialogue in here felt authentic. And so I was thinking, okay, the bits in Dresden, actually, I think I took portions of and adapted some of it, but I took dialogue and stuff, exchanges from this, because I thought, actually, I think these exchanges really happened. I think these arguments that he would have had happened, and so I used some dramatic license for that. And then also, I've got notebooks of his where he expresses and describes some of his thoughts and feelings, and fills them in. So I know what he's thinking at the time. And also then I've got this, this is my grandmother's journal that she wrote, some of her experiences during 1945, all in German. So I am so grateful for Richard, this man here, who translated not only this, but all the letters between my grandparents, which were all in German.
Okay, how many letters? I mean, there are lots of letters in the book, and I'm assuming that the letters aren't all in the book. So how many letters were there? I mean, incredible that they kept them all.
1940.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I, in my naivety, thought I might be able to try and translate them myself. It took me about 3 hours to translate one, and I thought, okay, if I try and replicate this, all I'll be doing would be translating letters. So Richard came along, and he was an absolute godsend.
So you've got this incredible kind of wealth of source material.
Yeah. But what I realised was it would be some bits of it were full of dialogue and stuff, and because I knew, and other bits wouldn't. I thought, well, there's got to be an evenness towards it. So there's certain things, and I'm going to read out an excerpt later where in my grandfather's obituary, in the tribute, there was one line which I found fascinating, which was, on one occasion, my grandfather, Fred, gave Guy Burgess, who some of you might have heard of, short shrift. And I was thinking, they must have had an argument. And so I guessed what the contents of that argument would be, based on also what I know my grandfather thought of Burgess and others. So that was... So that's one of the examples. So you kind of pictured
this encounter in a pub, basically, with Turing and Guy Burgess.
And I'm grateful for this guy Rowan Somerville, who sort of helped me shape the text and suggested areas where I could bring these scenes to life more.
So it's really powerful. It's also it has quite a contemporary feel. So one of the things that I'm guessing I don't know how much you drew from Fred's own journals. You've spent quite a bit of time with him exploring his own sexual identity.
Yeah.
So where was that theme drawn from?
Well, it was that was partly through the biography of Alan Turing.
Yeah.
So Alan Turing was homosexual himself, and my grandfather, because they were friends, I know that they had conversations because they recorded in Alan Turing's biography. So this was part of the thing that kind of drew them, is that Alan was very open in that area, and my grandfather, I think, could best be described as confused in that area, and just not having a clue, just finding these troubled waters, and finding Alan's own confidence and in that area slightly beguiling. And so there was just definitely an issue that he wrestled with. And
so it takes you really into a sense of quite a deep sense of connection with this man. And so I think both Fred and Rika come through quite powerfully in the book, actually. I mean, incredibly interesting people, which I think is one of the reasons why you read it and you think there's a lot of event and there's a lot of interest and depth, which I guess is one of the reasons why you think that it might be a film. So we're going to need to wrap this bit up in a moment, because otherwise people will not get to their drunk glass of wine during the interval. But were there any kind of real surprises as you came through? I mean, things that you went back and go, oh my gosh, I've just discovered this. This is so extraordinary.
I think the whole of the experience. My grandfather did code breaking in India. And so we discovered some of the reasons why his experiences in India, which again were complete blank to me. I kind of vaguely knew he'd done code breaking, but I had no idea of why he'd been sent there in India and all that sort of stuff. So that was brought to life, his wartime experience. But also, I don't think my nanny never really talked about her wartime experience at all. So it was all new.
Wow.
It was all new.
And what impact, lastly, has it had on you to do this? I mean, how has it changed you maybe as a person? How has it changed you in your sense of relating to this wider story between Britain and Germany and Coventry and Dresden?
That's a big question.
It's a big question, actually.
Yeah. I think there's a sense of deeper...
Bad interview technique.
Deeper compassion.
Yeah.
I think, a greater understanding of certainly... the brokenness that both my grandparents experienced and suffered from, and a kind of a greater understanding of certainly my grandfather, and it kind of makes, I think that sense of compassion for him, and very much a desire. I remember standing in the Frauenkirche, having just been welcomed so beautifully by the people of Dresden. When I was there back in 2015, and just saying, I feel like I'm a Dresdener. I feel that rooted up of very much. I'm not just British. I am not just English. I am British, English, German as well, and that actually part of my identity being really, really important and continuing to be so for me.
I think that's amazing, it was a privilege to be part of seeing you kind of on the earliest steps of that journey when I was there in Germany with Andy. And it took you a long time to wind down after it, I think, didn't it? Because you kind of got higher and higher as you were in Germany and all these different interviews and things. But thank you so much for sharing some of that with us.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to have some music, 4 short songs to lead us into an interval. There's going to be ample opportunity to purchase this book during this evening.
Of course.
So I've no idea what mechanisms have been devised here to take money off you.
So there's cash and card you can do.
Variable. So cash and card. So as you're listening to the songs, just be thinking about how many books you are going to be able to buy.
For your friends, neighbours, cousins.
But believe me, actually, as a Dean of a Cathedral, you get asked to read quite a lot of stuff. This is really good. I'm not going to say anything about all the other things. This is a really good read. You won't regret buying it for yourself and for others that are close to you. So Rich is going to sing.